Dear colleagues, participants to this workshop, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizing committee of this joint workshop on behalf of Milan and Ankara universities. I also sincerely thank to Professor Luca Peyronet and Dr. Agnes Savacca for their collaboration and efforts. Excuse me for my English. In my speech, I will give you some results of excavations in Çorum province, but I will not limit it with only last season. Our knowledge about the north-central Anatolia before the Hittite occupation in the second millennium is still vague. The local so-called Hatti culture, which dominated the region surrounded by Kızılırmak, ancient Halis river in the third millennium BC is barely understood. The rich material culture of the early Bronze Age III dated approximately between 2400 and 2100 BC was demonstrated, especially with metal artifacts. The metal assemblages have been collected through excavations, mostly at cemetery areas. However, settlements associated with those cemeteries have generally not been recovered. Furthermore, vast amount of metal artifacts were found during illegal activities, thus requires further refining in chronology and context. Nevertheless, the available material culture, especially metal artifacts from cemeteries and settlements like Alacöyük, Eskiyapar, Kalınkaya, Resiloğlu, Balıbağ, Oymaağaç, Göller, Horostepe, Kayapınar signals in wealth and advanced technological skills of local populations. The prehistoric settlements and the cemetery of Resiloğlu are located in Delice Valley at the western part of Çorum. Modern-day Çorum is homeland of the Hatti people, the culture that later formed the Hittite Empire. Nevertheless, systematic excavations targeting the Hatti settlements are relatively rare. Resiloğlu is situated roughly 19 kilometers northwest of Alacöyük, which is one of the major sites of central Anatolia. The settlements of Resiloğlu control an important strategic location overlooking the Delice River Valley from Kavşut at the south through Kula, where it meets with Kızılırmak River, ancient Halis. This hilltop and strategic position must have provided the site and access to the networks from the central Anatolia towards the Black Sea region. Resiloğlu settlement is very close to salt and mineral deposits in Çankırı and Mersifon region. Resiloğlu settlement is very close to salt and mineral deposits in Çankırı, Mersifon region. Galatian or province of Çankırı obsidian sources are not far from Resiloğlu. Resiloğlu is discovered Resiloğlu is discovered in 1998 and Austin came to Kaleboynu Mount. After our team has recorded early Bronze Age settlement and a nearby cemetery, so far unknown in archaeological literature in 1998. First excavation started in 2003 under the direction of Çorum Museum with the supervision of me, and excavation project ended in 2018. In those days, the publication studies are still go on. You see a man from Italy, Dr. Carlo Corti is my first foreign visitor in Resilol. Excavations revealed a cemetery are situated on a high ridge overlooking the Delice Valley. This particularly presents the burial customs of the local people of Hatti, which existed in the area between Kızılırmak and Yeşilırmak rivers before the arrivals of the Hittites into region. Apart from the royal tombs of Alacık, only a small number of Bronze Age cemeteries which can shed light on the burial customs of the local people in this region have been systematically investigated. In this respect, excavations and research at Resilolu provide an important data for the early Bronze Age archaeology of the region. Settlements areas on southeast, northwest have surrounded the early Bronze Age cemetery. The excavations at the southeast mount reveals an Iron Age fort-like settlement which was built on the top of the second half of the early Bronze Age settlement with partially well-preserved houses and silos. Iron Age settlement on the southeast mount produced two occupation phases. Iron Age house plan inside the fortification incomplete. Pottery is represented by Middle and Late Iron Age shared groups and does not differ from the kinds of pottery found in central Anatolia. Limited excavations conducted on the northwest mount showed us that this small mount produced two prehistoric building level and was occupied in the early and middle of the 3rd millennium BC. The architecture consisted of rectangular singular two-room dwellings. In this area, a large mud brick structure belonging to level 2 is poorly preserved. Regional pottery is handmade and they are brown and red colors. Inside the pot sheds, a vase with narrow mouth and animal-shaped handle is unique in north-central Anatolia during the early Bronze Age. The cemetery area is located nearby the northern section of the early Bronze Age settlement. Most of the graves were placed in the east and west orientation. The graves are represented as three different levels in the second half of the 3rd millennium BC. In the recent excavations, the number of the graves reached to 288. Pitos graves constitute a majority of the graves at Resilolu. The pitoi were generally placed in the east, west, or northeast to southwest directions. Their mouths were usually closed with flat stones and in some cases with pots or semi-globular bodied large vessels and clay. Some of these graves were surrounded by a ring of stones in order to mark the location of the burial based on the available data. This practice was reserved only for pitoi burials. This practice is mainly known from Western Anatolia cemeteries dating to second half of the early Bronze Age. In addition to Alacık's unidentified example, this one, This practice has been only identified at Resuloğlu in North Anatolia. Another type of popular grave was stone or mud brick kissed graves. Stone kissed graves were 80 or 170 centimeter length in average, were built of red sandstone and limestone. Some of the stone kissed graves might have belonged to a wealthier class, as they were constructed in a more elaborate compared to the other graves. I believe that feudalist rulers of Resuloğlu and their families who had lived in the fortified southern mound were buried into this type of graves. Unfortunately, most of the graves were looted by the local people in recent times. Resuloğlu cemetery reflects not only local burial practices, but also provide information about the burial rites of Hattin people. Previously, sacrificial ceremony and feasts were only known from Alacık royal tombs. But now, Resuloğlu cemetery provides evidence of similar practices in ordinary graves. This tradition consisted of sacrificing bulls, offering heads and hooves, and cooked while the rest of the animal was cooked for the feast. This custom was performed for both the kissed and pitos graves. Pot graves were used as infant or child graves at Resuloğlu. Simple inhumation burials were reserved for adults. They reflect a common tradition in northern central Anatolia. Surprisingly enough, it is rarely practiced at Resuloğlu. Burial gifts constitute the most interesting finds of the cemetery area. Pottery from graves represent the common wear of the region between the ancient Halis and Iris during the last quarter of the 3rd millennium BC. We can also find this type of pottery in the Alacık tombs. Metal vessels, weapons, and jewelry were common in both male and female graves. Additionally, alabaster and terracotta idols were recovered, representing religious and cultic aspects of burial gifts. Our idol types is different from Kültepe idols, of course. Most of the metal vases were made from copper and copper alloys. They include bowls and vases, pans, spoons. Portable X-ray fluorescence analysis conducted on the metal objects from Resuloğlu revealed that bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, was used for production metal objects and metal vessels. Only a few examples are made of lead. Metal bowls are sometimes broken into pieces and thrown out of the graves. Sometimes metal cups placed above the right chest or near shoulders of the body. Most of the large vessels were placed near the feet. I said that some of them were broken into pieces and then thrown out of graves. This is a new custom, I think, in the north central Anatolia. Resuloğlu bowls with omphalos resemble both North Central Anatolia, especially Eski Yapar and Horostepe and Troy examples. In the North Central Anatolia, all these type of metal vessels must be innovation of the Hattian metal industry. Exact parallels can only be seen in the major early Bronze Age centers like Alacahöyük, Horostepe, and Eski Yapar. Metal weapons, which are left as burial gifts into the graves, include axes, daggers, and spearheads. Some of the copper flat axes have simple sockets. Sockets of axes with long and flat bodies were formed by folding in their long, narrow sides. Some sockets still have remains of wooden shaft. This type of axes were widely used in South Mesopotamia and Syria from the beginning of the early dynastic to the end of the Neo-Sumerian period. I remember only two examples from Central Anatolia, and one is coming from Kalınkaya and other is coming from Resuloğlu cemetery. The existence and appearance of Mesopotamian type weapons in North Central Anatolia towards the end of the 3rd millennium might be triggered by the activities of early traders. We know that some Sumerian type weapons were uncovered in Kültepe and Maşatöyük excavations. They were dated to the end of the early dynastic and Akkadian periods. So this type of material is not surprise for me in Resuloğlu. Some of the axes have similarities with the shaft-hole axes represented by various subtypes in northern part of the Central Anatolia. The technology of these types axes is interesting, and they correlate with Horostepe examples in the Middle Black Sea region in this time. And another shaft-hole axis. This is the second type of the shaft-hole axis with flat and rectangular bout seems to have had a widespread distribution only in the northern Anatolia. This type must be dated to second part of the 3rd millennium BC. The third type of shaft-hole axe fragment has curved blade which gets thinner towards to the socket. It should have had a long shaft. This axe seems to have broken into pieces and then thrown out of the grave like the metal vessels. Resuloğlu axe is known as Caucasian type, and only two examples were found in the Çorum province. This style of axes has emerged as the result of cultural contacts between the South Caucasia and North Central Anatolia. The fourth type of the copper shaft-hole axe fragment that was found in the Resuloğlu Pitos grave must belong to hammer axe type. This type of axes bolts can be hexagonal or octagonal. They were used both in Central Anatolia and Western Anatolia at the end of the Early Bronze Age II and the beginning of the Early Bronze Age III. The fifth type axe has a wide blade and the bolt is curved to the crescent shape. This type of exes are extremely uncommon in the vicinity of Resuloğlu. I remember only one example from Kalınkaya Early Bronze Age cemetery. Attached to the back of the socket, there is a flat crescent form. Scholars working on the classification of Anatolian X types call this form as the neck cone. This type of books must be prototype for at the same time the Hittite times. Excuse me, yes, I am saying about for this type. At the left side, we are seeing the Resuloğlu X. At the right side, you are seeing the Hittite X. And I think the Resuloğlu Early Bronze Age X must be the prototype of the Hittite X's. This is a hook-butted X, has hammer shape and rounded cutting edge. This type of X's date back to Early Bronze Age, and I said a little time ago, and only found they are in Resuloğlu and Kalınkaya cemeteries. Most of the daggers were left into the graves after intentional bending. First type of Resuloğlu daggers represent the main form of broad, tanged dagger, which seems to have predominant in Western Anatolia during the second half of the third millennium BC. The Resuloğlu example is unique for the central Anatolia, this type. And long tanged daggers with one or more rivets made of copper alloys were widely used in the north-central Anatolian necropolis. The more developed, usually riveted daggers of this type seem to constitute the most popular form in the Early Bronze Age Anatolia. It is interesting that the number of the metals per head is not too much in Resuloğlu graves. Only one example has a bent tank and a leaf-shaped blade with visible fabric remains. Among the metal weapons, a few number of weapons were uncovered in female burials. In this regard, small unalloyed copper mace heads left into the female graves as a symbol of status is intriguing. Various ornaments and jewelry constitute the most interesting burial gifts at the Resuloğlu graves. The necklaces found inside the graves at Resuloğlu constitute of beads and pendants of various materials such as stone, frit, faience, shell, uzonite, carnelian, amethyst, copper and copper alloys, electrum, silver, and gold. Many necklaces show remarkable close typological and technological parallels with allogeneic jewelry. X-ray fluorescence analyzes result of some beads and pendants showed surprisingly high concentrations of tin. The addition of an alloying agent such as tin in very high quantities may have been intended to produce a subtle color change in the finished products. Alloyed copper pins constitute the majority of the burial gifts uncovered in Resuloğlu graves. Their head forms allow us to make typological comparisons and chronological connections with the other regions. Most of the twisted pins were found at chest level and under the sometimes chin. intact examples were found on the arm or leg bones. In particular, band pins placed below jeans must have been used to attach clothes. On the slide, you can see a selection of analytical results of pins and amount of the alloying elements. And for this analysis, I want to thank to my colleague Thomas Zimmerman and him team. The most common type found was the globular headed pins. Heads of some globular headed pins are decorated with parallel grooves. This type of pins are common in the major Hattian centers. A few early Bronze Age examples are only known from the inner western Anatolia. A globular-headed toggle pin made of unalloyed copper is unique, as it shows the first appearance of this type in north-central Anatolia. Early examples of toggle pins are first seen in Syria, Levant, as well as in North and Upper Mesopotamia, around the middle of the 3rd millennium BC. A considerable number of these toggle pins were found in Western Anatolia during the Early Bronze Age. In this period, these objects must be spread to Central Anatolia with the increase of overland trade among the regions. According to the Akkadian text, toggle pins were often worn on the breasts of both goddesses and mortal women. Resulolo example was also found on the torso of a female skeleton. Maybe this can be by chance. There are two examples of double spherical headed pins in Resulolo graves. This type is rarely used in Central Anatolia in the second part of the 3rd millennium BC. The vase-headed pins unearthed in Resulolo graves are rarely seen in Central Anatolia excavations. Head forms and grooved geometric designs must have been copied from the regional pottery style of Central Anatolia. Hexagonal pyramid, double buttoned, conical, double spiral, and spiral-headed pins are the most common types in Anatolia at the 3rd millennium BC. Resulolo graves didn't yield any ornamental pins made of precious metals, except one example, which it was coated with gold leaf. However, the examples of gold and silver pins found at Alacaköyük and Gümüşhacıköy provides an idea about solid cast pins made of precious metals and used by the elites of the North Anatolia. Other copper and copper alloy burial gifts consist of bracelets, anklets, ear and hair rings, and torques. Some of the anklets produced with the same technique used for bracelets are more massive and heavy compared to bracelets. They were found in situ in pairs. Hasanoğlan statue presents us a glimpse of how Central Anatolian women used gold anklets during the early Bronze Age. Gold, electrum, and copper alloy earrings are the most popular personal adornments of Resulolo adults and childs. These objects are wrongly called as stud by the Alacaköyük excavators. Resulolo examples were always found as a pair near the skull. Shape of the earrings resembles local Anatolian stamp seals. Analyses show that some of the earrings have cores made of grayish colored stone or copper. The body or sometimes the head of the earrings were coated with gold-silver alloy leaf. Ring-shaped torques or neck rings were made of copper alloys and silver. They were probably used as both jewelry and ingot. An interesting copper alloy hair ring comes from the burial of a young female. It was found in just behind the head of the skeleton and includes only one piece. It could probably be a hair ring with double crescent. These types of ornaments were used in Syria and Mesopotamia as ear rings. Gold and silver crescent earrings in this group have been found at Mari, Tel Brak, and Ur. Widespread diffusion of these crescent earrings attest to long-distance passage of goods. Important variants of this type found in Kültepe and Hacı Bektaş indicate contacts between central Anatolia and southern Mesopotamia during the Akkadian period. Resiloğlu example must be produced in the North Anatolian workshops. Not only copper hair rings, but also some silver flat disc-shaped beads with tubular perforation covered in Resiloğlu indicates cultural interconnections with Syria, Mesopotamia, and other neighboring regions in the 3rd millennium BC. Some of the necklaces were composed of red and gold beads. Swastika-shaped beads demonstrate that these symbols were used by the locals both for jewelry and clothing fashion. At Resiloğlu, a total of 309 metals have been analyzed systematically with PXRF. Updated results were published in some journals. Dr. Gonca Dardeniz spent many hours for metal analysis in Çorum. I am deeply indebted to my colleague for her kind assistance. In Çorum, Amasya, Tokat province, this copper, arsenical, bronze, gold, silver, electrum, silver, gold, copper, lead copper, antimonial copper artifacts demonstrate the wealth of the North Anatolia. It is high level of technical accomplishment and the artistic talents of its craftsmen. It's clear that many of these objects had no connection with royal graves. Metallurgists of the early Bronze Age period had mastered the sophisticated techniques of lost wax casting, annealing, gilding with gold and silver, multiple mold casting, shaft hole casting, and soldering. These techniques are typical of the metalwork from Alacık, Sorostepe, Eskiyapar, Resiloğlu, and other sites on the central Anatolian plateau. Most of the metal objects of this region represent a local Anatolian technique and style. Of course, that appearance of morphological similarities with Mesopotamia, Syria, and Caucasia is the result of long-distance trading contacts. However, direct interracial relations are not formed only because of these commercial relations. Workshops that are controlled by rulers modeled each other's artifacts, copied them, and contributed to the increase of number of similar examples. Now let's look at short results of Southeast Mount excavations. Southeast Mount covers approximately 0.5 hectare. The Southeast Mount has been excavated since 2010, and it contains a hilltop settlement from Iron Age, as well as partially preserved structures and silos from the second half of the Early Bronze Age. A fortification wall from the second half of the third millennium BC encircles of complex of 22 rooms with various phases that belong to chief, all of which were contemporary with the second phase of the cemetery. Structures usually have mud bricks platforms that were attached to walls, hearths, ovens, in-situ groundstones, and mortars. The site plan reveals an arrangement where centrally located silos and courtyard having surrounded by multi-room early Bronze Age complex on the north and east. Each unit in the complex consisted of 3 or 4 rooms. The western sector of the complex was reserved for storage. Large vessels and other storage items were used to preserve grains. Other rooms in the complex were used for cooking and living. The units to the southeast of the complex were outside compound, and they had agglutinative plans. These houses had 3 or 4 rooms, which were used for cooking, storage, and living. The Southeast Mount has been calculated to have a population of 150 people. The silos are divided into 2 groups, private and public. The subsistence of Resuloğlu relied heavily on grains and produce was kept in storerooms, kitchens, and living quarters in houses. In-house storage had the purpose of short-term storage, which became clear from the storage vessels, small storage cups, clay boxes, this one, and grain boxes and silos. They were common practices in preparation of silos. All silos were curved into the bedrock, have circular, oval, and rectilinear plans. Peak marks are clearly visible on walls and at the bottom of silos. The walls and bottom of silos were covered with a mixture that consists of hay and mud. When a silo was full, the mouth of the silo was covered with hay, grass, or weeds and sealed with soil. This was known to be most practical way of sealing the silo. Additionally, river stones were used to cover the rim of the mouth of silos. We discovered some stamp seals at the bottom of the silos. And the preliminary results suggested grain storage in these silos. Apart from grains, the silos had lentils, peas, legumes, grapes, and fruit seeds. Archaeobotanically, analysis implied both public and private silos were mainly used to storage barley and lentils. A silo with an approximate volume of 10 cubic meters could contain 8,400 kilogram of barley or wheat. And seals found at the bottom of some of the silos may suggest the exercise of ownership of the content. Thank you very much for your attention.